Continuing on today with this sort of overall general heading, getting there from here, but today we're dealing with, well, where are we going? As I said last week, we're finishing off our discussion of the place that the Church of Christ finds itself in this and frankly every other century. And we're suggesting that the church finds itself in a wilderness experience, an in-between place, as we have discovered in our brief examination of the epistle to the Hebrews. But more properly, we have come to understand it not as an ordinary kind of an epistle, but as a written example of a sermon. And perhaps that is a sermon that has been preached to a group of Jewish converts in some unknown city, or perhaps simply distributed to be read in various synagogues where they may have been gathering. Either way, we are blessed to have what we have, a profound work of insight and blessing. Its function was to place their current struggles within the context of their forefathers' wilderness experience and to exhort their present followers, exhort them to a place of a greater posture of faith than their forefathers had. Those wandering in the wasteland between the enslavement that they came from and the land of freedom promised by a faithful God, and yet somehow lacking the faith in the power of the one that could get them there. It's a quandary, and to us looking back on that, knowing what we know, or what we believe we know, we shake our heads. It's confusing, and we wonder why. And yet when we look at our own circumstances, we often find that we have knowledge, we profess faith, but our actions do not belay the faith that we express. Same deal. Now, we also then propose that the current condition of our contextual reference point for Christ's church is in very much the same place, a metaphorical wilderness, a place where we become aliens embedded in a culture that is foreign to our actual kingdom home, with its allegiance to its servant, high priestly king, and his faithful, covenant-honoring, holy Father. And then, within the larger context of getting there from here, we asked a question last week, well, where are we? Where are we starting from? So you hopefully recall the slide that I had last week. Where are we? Where are we going? Who is we? Which is, by the way, probably the most important of those questions. Who is we? And finally, how do we get there? And I was going to suggest to you, or did suggest to you, that the first week of October, Dave will be introducing a new sermon series with the intent of spending the next several months giving us a structure, a methodology, if you will, of a process whereby we can get to where we think God may be leading us. We answered that question, where are we, with the assertion that we find ourselves in the hands of a faithful God with a mandate to persevere through an enabling faith that, even though situated in a place of discordant spiritual values with its potentially alienating misunderstanding of both our actions and our intentions, this culture, this world around us, yet Yet that journey will provide the security that the enveloping culture is striving for. That's where we are. So now, following along with our list of questions this morning, I ask, where are we going? Where are we going? It'd be pretty hard to find a more contextual kind of question. It's the kind of question that is impossible to answer without being able to understand just what context that question is being asked in. Because there are multiple answers to that question. For example, the author of Hebrews is addressing such a question in our scriptural passage this morning. The rhetoric suggests that the author, that they presuppose their audience to be asking what the end game is. And they answer the unstated question this way. So read with me from Hebrews 11, 13 to 16, beginning in verse 13. All these faithful ones died without receiving what God had promised them, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed the promise of God. They agreed that they were no more than foreigners and nomads here on earth. And obviously, people who talk like that are looking forward to a country that they can call their own. Where were they going? To a country that they could call their own. If they had meant the country they came from, they would have found a way to go back. And many of them wanted to, if you'll recall. But they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. And that is why God is not ashamed to be called their God. Here we are. For he has prepared a heavenly city for them. Where were they going? To a heavenly city. They're a band of nomads and foreigners on a journey to a designated place prepared by a faithful God. The energy for their journey is their faith in God's ability to provide. Where are we going? Well, we ask that question of ourselves, don't we? Where are we going? Hear it a lot. In our goal-directed culture, that question in its various forms is asked almost continuously. It's a foundational question for understanding direction and future vision. Marketers use this kind of symbolism all the time. Here's an example of how the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan lets their constituents know what they do. We're here to get you there. Now note that they don't tell you where there is. Apparently it's someplace on Google Maps. That's what that little red insignia means. Also note that they don't say where they're starting from. In both instances, it's done by design. It's done so that a person can place themselves somewhere on that linear continuum. The end game is not to define the objective, but to create personal buy-in. And it is a very effective strategy. Where are we going? Well, the church, now church big C, can ask itself the same kind of question, and the answers are based on a myriad of individual theologies and understandings, eschatological and otherwise. Eschatology simply means the study of the end times. One might answer, well, we are headed for a unified church. And another might say, well, we're headed for total destruction because of left-wing liberalism. And another might say, where are we going? We're going nowhere. We aren't going anywhere because we are mired in the past, inflexible traditions of paternalism concentrated in misogynistic power positions. And that means simply that we're mired in a past where the good old boys just want to maintain the power that they've always had and will put down anyone that kind of stands in their way, one way or another. Terrible way to talk about the church. But there are people that view our ongoing journey as not being a journey at all, as just simply stalled because of that. For some, the answer to where are we going may be just as simple and yet as profound as we are going to meet Jesus. So you see what I mean. The answer to the question is shaped through the perceptions and the experience of the person who's asking it. A biblical answer would reference the rhetoric of the author of Hebrews, and Jesus himself referred to what some translations call a shining city on a hill. Read with me from Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16, and you may recall this from our study in Matthew, that sermon series that we had a short time ago. It's from smack dab at the sort of end of that Sermon on the Mount series, the Beatitudes. You are the salt of the earth. Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16, and almost all of my scriptural passages come from the New Living Translation. You are the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it has lost its flavor? Can you make it useful again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. You are the light of the world, like a city on a mountain, glowing in the night for all to see. Don't hide your light under a basket. Instead, put it on a stand and let it shine for all. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. And here's the interesting thing. The city on the mountain that he spoke of in that particular case, but is often translated as city on a hill, that was reference to a becoming stage through which he himself would be reflected and others would perceive. For Jesus, this was what his followers were supposed to become. And it should come as no surprise that these words and the rhetoric of Hebrews align. You can try to individualize this passage all you want, but contextually, it just doesn't play out that way. Jesus is not talking about individual followers doing good works. At least he's just not talking about that alone. He's talking about his followers as a collective. One does not refer to individual believers as a city unless they are gathered together as an entity of multiples. And also look at the preceding verse, Matthew 5, beginning in verse 10. God blesses those who are persecuted because they live for God, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses you when you are mocked and persecuted and lied about because you are my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven as a reminder. The ancient prophets were persecuted too. The author of Hebrews had obviously read this ministry from Jesus, because the same language of persecution and the same sense of moving forward to a city of hope grounded in faith is obviously found in Hebrews. I've just read it to you. Now, of course, Christ's church is composed of individual believers who are committed to a way of living their lives in such a way as Jesus becomes the center of attention. I get that. And in the same way, our Hebrews author has brought us from a focus on the individual journey, however, to that of a collective experience. We don't live this life on our own terms, on our own, by ourselves. Faithful obedience becomes the hallmark of those that recognize the atoning work of the great high priest in their own lives, and then they come together to reflect the beauty of his presence amongst them. Metaphorically, it's like a single diamond that, when combined with a host of others, the brilliance becomes just absolutely breathtaking. The single diamond, me, becomes we. It's also the kind of beauty displayed in the obedient posture taken by Wendy and Lisa this morning. Each of them having recognized that Jesus has made it possible to stand in the presence of his Father, and by extension their Abba Father, free from the bondage of sin in their lives, as their testimonies revealed to us this morning. Not that they weren't continuing to sin, not that they were perfect, not that they had somehow escaped this curse that envelops all of us, suffering humanity. Not that, but by obediently following Christ's example, they partake in the solemn ritual of baptism, and in so doing symbolize for all to see that they have passed from spiritual death to life, joining with a family composed of all who have embarked on the journey to become more Christ-like. They're on the path, and this is simply an observable sign, a message that they wish to send, that yes, this is where we are, and this is where we are headed. Where there was once no ability to come into the presence of God, they now are washed clean through the blood of Christ, not because of what they have accomplished, but what Christ accomplished for them. As the Apostle Peter writes in our second reading this morning, 1 Peter chapter 3, beginning at verse 20, those who disobeyed God long ago, when God waited patiently while Noah was building his boat, only 8 people were saved from drowning in that terrible flood. And this is a picture of baptism, which now saves you by the power of Jesus Christ's resurrection. Baptism is not a removal of dirt from your body. It is an appeal to God from a clean conscience because of his work, not ours. Yes, faithful obedience becomes the hallmark of those headed to the shining city on a hill. And according to Hebrews, this includes obedience to the command to not fail to assemble yourselves together. Why? so that we can support one another, move one another, motivate one another, encourage one another. We read last week in our first scripture reading, and I'm sure you've got that memorized by now, beginning Hebrews chapter 10 at verse 24. Think of the ways to encourage one another to outbursts of love and good deeds. Isn't that an amazing verse? To encourage one another to the outbursts of love and good deeds. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage and warn each other, especially now that the day of his coming back again is drawing near. Now, we probably all of us know of someone who has given up on church and feels justified in sitting at home consuming their favorite service on TV without all the hassles of having to deal with the politics or the backbiting or the complaining that they may have experienced in a church setting. Maybe they or one of you may have spent a good deal of time in the church and are just plain burnt out, just tired of it all. Well, guess what? According to Hebrews, if you're using that as an excuse, it's actually disobedience. And before somebody gets upset and I start to get all the indignant emails and phone calls, let me assure you that I am not talking about those who are unable to come to church in person because of a whole range of very valid reasons, including COVID-related issues. I'm not talking about that. No, what I'm talking about is the believer that doesn't see a valid reason to attend church at all. Their experience has found it to be far from the shining city on a hill that Jesus talked about. And okay, I get that. I get it. I'm a transitional pastor. I exist to help churches deal with their brokenness. I understand what brokenness in a church looks like. So if I was speaking directly to such a person, maybe somebody out there, I would say you're right. Churches are not perfect places. But here's the deal. They're not perfect because they are filled with imperfect people. People just like you. But at least there are people who keep on trying. People who are on the way to becoming that shining city on a hill. Nobody has arrived yet. But a church that represents the body of Christ does not have to have arrived. That's not the definition. And for sure, they don't have to be perfect. All they have to do is point to the one who is perfect. So, if you know someone who's given up on church and are not worshiping anywhere, invite them to come here. Come to a place that is really broken. And we can all be broken together. All of us being healed in one way or another by the compassionate healer who designs and builds the shining city on the hill. So, back to the question, where are we going? Well, I said context is everything, but if you're a Christ follower, perhaps one way to answer the question is to say, I'm on the way to being like Jesus, and I am going to be with him someday. That's where we are going. Works for me. But I submit to you that an even more revealing question for the individual believer is, and you can consider this a Lloydism, who are we being on the way to where we are going? Who are we being on the way to where we are going? But you say, that's not what I mean at all when we ask, where are we going? What we mean is more like what Alice in Wonderland meant. Remember the dialogue from last week? The question is related to what direction our Queensway Baptist Church family is headed or should head. What's the plan? Remember what Alice asked? Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go? And you know the answer from the Cheshire Cat. Well, that depends very much on where you want to go. Now, that's a question I can answer. Where are we going? We're going in the direction of becoming a shining city on a hill. Now, of course, I understand that there's some who are concerned about our direction here at Queensway Baptist Church. I get that. And I appreciate it. And I'm not making light of that concern. There's obviously been a great deal of change here at Queensway Baptist, and with change comes uncertainty, and with uncertainty comes anxiety. I and others in leadership have heard that question asked quite a lot. But here's the deal. Often it's not asked directly. Often it's not a direct question. It's kind of a sideways question. Often it comes out something like, they never tell us anything. They never tell us anything. Now, I'm never quite sure who this mysterious they are. I suppose that what is meant is that your council and your pastors never tell you anything. Well, gosh, we truly are doing our best to keep you informed. But please understand that the sand in the wilderness that we are all trekking through is constantly shifting. The communication subcommittee of council is meeting now to come up with the next transition update. It'll be forthcoming very soon. But I can tell you that the council is really pleased with the way our reopening process is developing. My goodness, we've just been able to witness together a baptism for the first time in several years. In-person children's ministry has begun. Progress is being made, slow though it may be. But I'll tell you what concerns me about the question when it's phrased that way. What concerns me is that I think there's something behind the question, where are we going, when it's asked of leadership. It bothers me that you want to be told because it presupposes that you have no responsibility for the answer. And I'm afraid you're incorrect. You do have that responsibility. It bothers me that you've forgotten that You are Baptists. And what happens in this church and the way things happen is a biblically based corporate process of decision making. However, there seems to be a desire to shift that planning process over to your leaders. And there's something just a little bit wrong-headed about that. Actually, it's your leadership, including your pastors, who should be asking you, the congregation, where are we going? And then we actually all share in a mandate to discover the answer to that question together. But the great thing about this church, unlike so many others, is that there seems to be a very real desire to return to those Baptist roots, those roots of congregational authority. But this church has undergone such foundational stress over the past several years that remedial action needs to be slow, and it needs to be meticulous, and God knows it needs to be sensitive. There's been little chance to bring hurting folks together for a time of relational healing. And when you read Council's update that's forthcoming, you're going to discover that that is about to happen in the very near future. Now that some of the restrictions have been lifted, it will be possible to come together on Wednesday nights, we're hoping, first for a time of relational healing and then for corporate reflection as we discern together how God is leading us. And you're going to hear more about that in coming weeks. This is family business. And we will need all family members on deck. So please keep your Wednesday nights free for the next several months. Because we need you desperately. When that happens, we'll meet in a safe space, and I mean safe in all ways, not just related to health measures. We want to create a space free of judgment or recrimination, a space where people can be free to tell us what they have experienced over these past several years, where they can express their pain and their sense of loss and their grief. Some of your brothers and sisters are hurting. We need to hear and honor that without the need to defend or to rationalize. That's what a safe space is. We need to find ways to love each other. We need to recapture the joy that is the hallmark of those who reside in the city on the hill. For it truly is a city of joy. Amen.